what that means. The Amos Fortune Forum is now in session. I want to welcome all of you. My name is Brad Smith. This is the sixth presentation we've had this summer. We have one more next week. Hope you'll all join us. I have just a few short announcements, mostly thank yous. First of all, I want to thank all of you for joining on a pretty rough night weather-wise. We have a lot of hardy souls here, so give yourself a hand. I want to remind everybody that you can go to our website to learn more about our speaker, about our past speakers, about what will be happening next week. You can learn more about the Amos Fortune Forum, about Amos Fortune. You can contact us. You can donate to the forum. As you know, it's free and open to everyone and has been that way since 1946 that we've been meeting in this meeting house. So it's thanks to the generosity of people like you and to our corporate sponsors as well that we're able to keep it that way. We'll also have our begging bowls at the door on the way out. If you haven't had an opportunity and you're moved to do so, we welcome you to do that. A few thank yous, but very important ones. First to Peggy Hogan and Gary Benfield for hosting our speaker tonight and making sure she had a nice meal under her belt before she came over here. As we always do, there will be a reception afterwards directly across the way next to the parish house. I was over there earlier. There's lots of goodies, good food, so please plan on joining our speaker and your friends to relax and ask some more questions if you don't get your questions answered at the end of the evening here. Everyone is invited. I'd also like to thank my darling wife, Robin Oliver, for sponsoring the beautiful flowers from Kohl's tonight. And to Rosemary Putnam for thinking of this idea in the first place. We get a lot of suggestions about who to have and what to talk about. And Rosemary not only suggested one, but two this year. So you get a big award for that one. We will be recording this probably by midday tomorrow. It will be up on YouTube, so you can watch it again if you'd like. Or if you have family and friends who aren't able to make it here tonight, they'll be able to watch this in its entirety. And it will stay up there forever, I imagine. So you can watch it at your leisure. With that, I would like to bring Ellen Widmer, a fellow committee member and a good friend, over to the podium here to introduce our speaker for the evening. Ellen.
Brad's a lot taller than I am, and I don't quite know how to, I can't really see you. Just a minute. Oh, thanks, okay.
And then there's the box. That's why they brought it for.
Oh, okay. I think I'll just stand. I don't like microphones. I don't know how to handle them. Sorry. I hate talking. There. This I can do. This fits my height. Sorry for that. Welcome to this wonderful occasion. The talk has a very intriguing title, America's Preeminent Sculptor You've Never Heard of, Augustus Saint-Gaudens. And from reading the material and from dinner, I learned that there are really going to be three possible topics tonight. I don't know which one, or one, two, or three, Kerstin is going to emphasize. But the first one is Saint-Gaudens, a very important sculptor. To hear about him and his sort of seminar, his group that he assembled in Cornish, New Hampshire, and the park that exists to this day. The second, I've never heard of a park, a national park dedicated to an artist of any kind. So I think what the National Park Service is doing in this game will be another interesting facet. And the last is about Kerstin herself. You see her beautiful uniform tonight, and she is going to tell you about all the other parks that she's been involved with and how she got into this field in the first place. So those are the three topics. I don't know if you're going to get to all of them, but do your best. I'm looking forward to the talk.
Let's see. How is this, everybody? Okay. Because we kind of...
Let's push this.
Yeah. Thank you for coming out tonight, everybody. I appreciate it. All righty. With these hurricane winds, it's a little bit balmier. Oh, louder? Okay. How's that? Let's see. Okay. My kids never asked me to talk louder, so this is interesting. Okay. How is this? Okay, great. Just move this back a little bit. All righty. Well, thank you. Again, my name's Kerstin Burlingame, and I've been at a gaggle of parks from North Dakota to the Everglades in Florida to Mount Rainier, but I've settled in at Saint-Gaudens. I've been there almost 20 years now, and it is a really special place. And I thought we'd have some goals for the evening. One is I'd like to share some stories about who Augustus Saint-Gaudens is, some folks from the Cornish art colony. Two, I'd like to try to see if we can make connections between all of you and Augustus Saint-Gaudens somehow tonight. And three, I'd like to inspire you to visit the park, which is New Hampshire's only National Park Service site, unless you include the Appalachian Trail, which runs through. And it's the only National Park Service site dedicated to a sculptor. So there are 430 National Park Service sites, and this is the only one specifically to a sculptor. And it's a really special gem, and you're only an hour and a half away. So let's see if we can meet those goals tonight. All right. So you already know what the name is, so I know you know a little bit about Saint-Gaudens, but humor me. What if I told you that just a little over an hour and a half away is the home of one of America's most influential artists, a sculptor who captured portraits of famous artists of the time, wealthy and influential families, family members of the Gilded Age, which was just post-Civil War, Civil War generals and admirals, and presidents. An artist who helped set the tone for the American art Renaissance, where a new style of art emerged with a shift towards national identity. The person who was the first private artist to design a coin for the United States Mint, and if anybody has one of these, we'll share that at the end of the night. We'll pass it around. And whose $20 gold coin is currently the most expensive coin in the world. An artist who depicted the U.S. Black Regiment, the Massachusetts 54th, and portrayed them with dignity and heroism, which was a first of its type in this country. And it might be a name you've never heard of before you heard of this program, Augustus Saint-Gaudens. So by a show of hands, how many people have heard about him before this program? Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Nobody fact check me then. Just kidding. Okay. So most of you have. By a show of hands, how many people have been to Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park? Okay, all right, that's great. I'm hoping I can entice you to come back too. Even if you haven't been to the site or seen any of his art directly, which it sounds like most of you have, we might still be able to make that 6 degrees of separation connection with you today. Because his artwork was far-reaching, his influence in the national art portfolio was far-reaching as well. So I will admit I came here from Washington State, from Mount Rainier about 20 years ago, and I hadn't heard of him. My husband's job transferred out here. I was like, is there a park I can work at? Because I'd always worked at parks. And he said, Saint-Gaudens. And I said, what's a Saint-Gaudens? And he's like, well, I think he was a sculptor. And when I came here, I realized I had seen his Puritan in Springfield, Mass. I'd seen his Standing Lincoln in Lincoln Park, Chicago. I'd seen things in my school textbooks, but I just didn't know who the artist was that had done those. So to get a clear picture of Augustus, I thought we'd take a little bit of a step back in time to his roots to get a little bit of understanding on that. And please do let me know if you need me to talk louder. I do. Okay, maybe I'll... Okay. Rosemary, you're my sound check. All righty. So Augustus, here in the center, was born in Dublin, Ireland, to a French father, Bernard Saint-Gaudens, who probably pronounced it, I don't speak French, but Saint-Gaudens, and an Irish mother, Mary McGuinness. And he was born in 1848. The potato famine chased the young family over to the United States. So in Ellis Island, they decided, let's move to Boston. So they moved to Boston for a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, and then ended up going back to New York City. And that's where the family settled. And both Bernard and Mary were cobblers or shoemakers. That's how they met at a cobbler place in Dublin, Ireland. And so they hit it off, had Augustus, moved over. Now this was a time where it was a mass immigration to the United States, and there definitely was like a hierarchy of immigrants, right? And Irish signs that said, Irish need not apply were prevalent. So they did not lean into Mary's side of the family, but rather the French side, Bernard's. And Bernard created a shoe shop that was specifically trying to attract French, it was like advertising French ladies' shoes. And the family did fine financially. However, they couldn't afford higher education. So when Augustus was 13, it means he would have just graduated 8th grade. He was technically done with his formal schooling, and they couldn't afford higher education past that. So his dad said, now that you're a man, at the age of 13, you've got to help provide for the family. What do you want to do with yourself? And Augustus said, I'd like to work with my hands. And so basically he'd already shown some skill with drawing and with sculpture. For example, this is a drawing that he did of his mother, Mary McGuinness, when he was probably 14 or 15, and a bronze sculpture of his dad that he did probably when he was 17 or 18. So he was already showing this prowess, as a young teen. And so his dad, being the French shoemaker, made a French connection with two different cameo cutters in New York City. And from the ages of 13 through 19, young Augustus would go work for the French cameo cutters all day, cutting cameos. You can see, cameos were basically mini relief sculptures made in gems. It could be topaz, it could be shell, it could be stone. And these are all examples. That bracelet at the top was one that he did when he was 13 years old. He was already upstaging some of these two folks that he apprenticed for. Not only was he working full-time doing that, but he was taking classes in New York City at the Cooper Union and the National Academy of Design. So he's very busy. He was also a first-hand witness to some of America's most fraught, divided history. This was the tumultuous time in our country's history. The Civil War was basically the background to Augustus's youth, and he was very much shaped by that. From that first studio in 1861, when he was only 13 years old, he looked out the window in New York City and he saw the recently elected President Abraham Lincoln in a carriage on his way to Washington, D.C. And it really affected him. First of all, he remarked that Abraham Lincoln looked like too big of a figure to be in this small carriage. But this was a hero of his, and it was a hero of his father's as well. His father, Bernard, was a strict abolitionist, as was his mother. And at various times, he saw troops marching off to the Civil War. So when he was 19, he wanted to move on to something bigger, both literally, size-wise, and figuratively, to expand his learning and work experience and to have a bigger audience than what cameos would have reached. So he wanted to go study in Paris. Bernard had set aside $100 of his son's wages, and he presented him with $100 that he'd set aside, and he said, now you can go study in Paris with this $100. And one of the cameo cutters that he worked for matched that with another $100. So young Augustus went off with $200 to Paris, which probably stretched a little ways back then. He departed in 1867, so thinking of this timeline-wise, this would be 2 years after the Civil War, and he was the first American sculptor to study at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, which was a big honor. He was a bit of a starving artist because $200 only goes so far, so he shared studio and living space. He kept working on cameos. These are all, well, the two, there's got George Washington, and I believe that's Hercules that he worked on to keep the income rolling in. He made sure to make connections with the wealthier clientele. So in the upper right is Senator William Evarts, who is from Windsor, Vermont. He was a U.S. senator. At one time he was the Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of State, and he happened to be on a trip, business trip to Rome, and he wandered into Augustus's studio, and he loved what this young man was doing, so he commissioned him to do a portrait of himself and family members. So Augustus was kind of ran after his father a little bit. Bernard was very gregarious and outgoing and could really hobnob with all sorts of different social classes and everything, and Saint-Gaudens was the same way. That's what you kind of needed to do as an artist. You needed to be very vocal about it and meet people that could afford to pay you, a good sum for some of these pieces. Somebody else besides Senator Evarts who helped shape his legacy was a young woman that he met in Rome at a Christmas party. So it's a Christmas party. Let's all picture that because it just sounds amazing. A Christmas party in Rome, and I believe it was 1873. And it was a Christmas party for expats, basically young artists, American artists. They all got together. He met this young woman who he had a lot in common with. And it was Augusta Homer. She was an American. She was an artist. They were the exact same age. They were 25 when they met. They had to have mentioned that they had similar names, although we have nothing in writing about that, but I'm sure it came up. So it was Augustus and Augusta. And while they had all these similarities, they had some distinct differences. Where I mentioned he was gregarious and very outgoing. She was more reserved. She was going hard of hearing. She had tinnitus, which is ringing in your ear, and she was going deaf from something separate. So she was fairly shy and reserved. She was also from a different social standing. Her parents were in textiles. They were upper middle class. She was raised with servants. He wasn't. So there were some different things. Despite those couple of differences, they did fall in love. You can't stop that. And they were engaged less than 6 months later. So they met when they were 25, engaged. But Saint-Gaudens did not want to marry her. He didn't want to commit to marrying her until he could prove to her that he could provide for her. And he felt like he could only do that if he had a public commission. So something that would be seen in a city square by, visible by thousands of people. So they put off marrying for 4 years until Augustus received his first public commission, which was the David Glasgow Farragut Monument in New York City. So you're going to see a theme here. Saint-Gaudens did several Civil War monuments. He came into his fruition just after the Civil War when more public monuments were going up across the country than at any time before or since. So it was kind of fortuitous for him. Farragut himself was the country's first admiral. He was already retired when the Civil War came about. And it was during that fraught time when obviously the nation was very divided and the South wanted him, because he was originally from Tennessee, he was from the South. They wanted him to fight for them. The North wanted him. And Farragut said, I've got to stick to the flag. He coined that term. He decided to fight for the United States Army and went with the Union. And there are many schools, monuments. I think there's a U.S. naval ship named after Farragut. Isn't there Farragut Station in Washington, D.C.? So his name is becoming a little lost in history, but you can see his name everywhere. We just have to remember who he was. There was a competition to see who would win the right to do this, and Augustus actually got really excited about it. He's like, I think this is my break. And he put together a sketch. Now, I'm going to show you a few more images in a second. He always started with pencil and paper. And he got together with the well-known architect at the time, Stanford White. Stanford White designed a base for it. He submitted his proposal, and he actually came in second place. A different sculptor, John Quincy Adams Ward, came in first place. But he saw the younger man's proposal, and he said, I'm going to step aside and let Augustus have it. So that's what got the ball rolling for Augustus. And then he ran away with it. He created a very realistic figure, which was new at that time. Back then, most sculptors were posing their war heroes or political heroes or whoever in classical fashion. So by that, this is a real statue, picture George Washington in a toga sitting on a throne. That was the trend at that time. And Augustus was one of the first people that was like, I want to move away from that. I want to create this realistic thing where he's standing on the bow of his ship, the wind's blowing his jacket open, just make it really realistic. But he also wanted allegorical figures with like a nod to the classics. So on the base are these two women that are allegorical figures that represent ideas, and they've got courage and loyalty, which tie into the naval theme. And he finished it in 2 years. He did marry Gussie, because he proved he could provide for her. He got a $5,000 paycheck at that time. This would have been in 1881. You'll have to do an inflation calculator later at home to tell you how much that was. But it was a good bit of money. And it was unveiled on Memorial Day in 1881 to wide acclaim. People loved that it was different. And it was like the start of the American art renaissance. So now, like I said, he was paid $5,000 for that. He could get paid $10,000 for personal portraits that were in people's homes. So he created, these were people that could, once his name was out there, he never had to compete for a commission again. People sought him out. And they're, prominent people of the day. You've got Robert Louis Stevenson in the upper right corner, the author of Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They were actually friends. It was just going to be a little round circular portrait for Robert Louis Stevenson for his friend, although I think he paid him. A church in Edinburgh, Scotland, commissioned a whole giant piece with a whole, it's not quite heroic size, but bigger than life size. So these things would sometimes there'd be multiple versions. He would trade art with other artists. So you see the woman playing the guitar, that's Violet Singer Sargent. She was John Singer Sargent's sister. So John Singer Sargent did a painting of Augusta and Augustus's son Homer. In return, he did this relief portrait of Violet Singer Sargent. And then we've got the young girl in the lower left. That's Gertrude Vanderbilt. So again, these are like folks that could afford to shell over a lot of money, and that was kind of his bread and butter. And then the young boy in the upper corner is his son Homer, the only son that Gus and Gussie, or Augustus and Augusta, had together. And he was probably 2 or 3, so there were a lot of personal portraits that he did of family. So he's moving along, he's doing private things, he's getting more public commissions. He got a commission to do a monument of one of the most well-known people of the day, who is still one of the most recognizable figures in the world today, by anybody, even though he died almost 160 years ago. I'm sure we'll all recognize this guy, and it was Abraham Lincoln. So I'd mentioned earlier that Augustus had seen Abraham Lincoln when he was 13 on his way to, I think it was the inauguration in Washington, D.C. He saw him 4 years later when he was age 17. This is just after the end of the Civil War. As it was ending, it was after Lincoln had been assassinated. And his body came through New York City. And young Augustus, this was one of his heroes and his father's heroes, he got in line twice to view Abraham Lincoln's body. And I always wonder, like, did he know that 18 or 19 years later he would be, commissioned to do a portrait of this man for Chicago? He got the commission in 1884 and set to the task of working on Abraham Lincoln. It's called Abraham Lincoln the Man, or the Standing Lincoln. And you can see how heroic in size this is. You've got Augustus behind the chair. He depicted Lincoln as if Lincoln was getting up to address, make a speech, basically. The chair is oversized, and St. Gaudens made it that way to kind of prove or show, he was hoping, that that chair is bigger than any one person, right? Nobody is bigger than that chair, and Abraham Lincoln knew that. And he showing him separate from the chair is also showing him as one of the people, not as a ruler, sitting in a throne or anything like that. He wanted to get all the details correct, so he was actually able to use Abraham Lincoln's life mask to get the features. So I'm sure a lot of us know about like death masks from that era. Lincoln did not have a death mask. He actually had a life mask. After he was recently elected, a sculptor, Leonard Volk, somehow knew that there would be more monuments to Lincoln up one day than any other person in the United States. You're going to find more sculptures of him than anybody else. So he asked Lincoln if he could do a life mask of him. So we've got to picture that. Has anybody had plaster? A plaster, you basically have to have some sort of oil, plaster. You have to have your eyes shut, maybe straws up your nose so you can breathe while it's drying. And Abraham Lincoln had the patience to sit through that. He also had his right hand done. So sculptors can use those to go, forth creating something. So St. Gaudens worked off that a little. What you might notice Abraham Lincoln is missing there is his beard. His first couple years, he didn't have that beard until he wanted to be reelected. And we actually have a copy of this life mask that we let people touch at St. Gaudens too. It's kind of interesting. So St. Gaudens was originally working on this in New York City. He's becoming a big hit. A lot of people are coming in and out of his studio, and he loved that because he loved to chat with people. But it kind of slowed his work down. So he needed to get to someplace a little quieter. He was also having a hard time finding a model in New York City, despite it being a city of tens of thousands, if not millions at that time. And he couldn't find a model there. So in steps Charles Beeman. We've got a little picture of him here. He was a friend and lawyer to Augustus Saint-Gaudens, as well as a patron of the arts. Beeman moved to Cornish himself it was 1884, and built himself a summer residence along the Connecticut River called the Blow-Me-Down Farm. He thought if he could get Augustus Saint-Gaudens up to Cornish, maybe other artists would follow. So he said, I've got this house I can sell you or rent to you, whatever, and Cornish is the land of Lincoln-shaped men. So if you come up here, you're going to find a model. So he threw that hook out, lured St. Gaudens with the land of Lincoln-shaped men, and Augustus and Augusta took the train ride up from New York City to Windsor, Vermont, arrived in April, which we're all local. We all know what April looks like here. It's not spring, it's not winter, it's mud season. And the house looked like that when he moved in. And Augustus actually took one look and said he thought there were skeletons dangling from the windows. He wanted to get back on the train to New York City. But Augusta is the one that persuaded him to stay. And he found that model, Langdon Morse. He was a farmer over in Windsor, Vermont, actually. He got the Standing Lincoln done in 2 years, which was pretty good record speed for him. He ended up falling in love with the place. And they ended up staying here in this house for 15 years, summers only. And then they moved up full-time in 1900 until the end of his days. And he named this house Aspet after his father's hometown, Aspet, in the Pyrenees in France. So it quickly became a hub of activity, with friends, family, fellow artists moving to Cornish, either for summers, like the St. Gaudens family initially did, or year-round. Many would take that 9-hour train ride up. Now it's 6 hours. The train line still runs. And they'd get off in Windsor and then commute the couple miles carriage ride. Excuse me. I'm trying to find my arrow. Let's see if I can do that. Yes, okay. So along with purchasing Aspet, they acquired 22 acres of land that included fields, forested areas. They set about to landscaping the property with gardens, both floral and fruit and vegetables, and fountains and statuary to adorn the gardens. The property came with a few additional outbuildings, so you can see Aspet's the White House. To the left of that, he converted that into a little studio. We call it the little studio, although anybody that's been there knows it's fairly large. He had another larger studio on the property so they could work on those super big monuments. He needed something that could house these larger monuments and the multiple assistants that were working on these pieces because it takes a whole team of people. You need a place to store clay, to mix plaster, everything needed to complete a monumental work, and to affix a toboggan run to. So once they moved in year-round, they were like, well, what do you do in the winter, right? We all struggle with that. Well, you got to get out somehow. So that's the view of the toboggan run off the back of the large studio. And if you wanted a top view, that's what the top looked like. And this is the size of work that he would do in there. This is the Sherman Monument. And down below you see 10 people. Augustus is third from the left with a dog in front of him. That's the whole team. At this point in his career, he's doing very well. He can kind of act like the director of something. And then he could be like, you mix the plaster, you work on the angel's wings, you work on the horse, because he wasn't a great equestrian from things that we've read about him. He never looks comfortable in the pictures that I've seen of him on a horse. And he knew what he was really good at, and he knew what he could give to others that they were really good at. So he shared very, very well. And you'll notice out of those 9 assistants that he has, only one of them is a woman, which, doesn't, not 50-50 there. However, he did have probably 7 or 8 female assistants that he worked with. So he really supported them. And one of his assistants, Frances Grimes, was actually the one that he felt like she intuited what he wanted without him even needing to tell her what it was. They just had this good intuition together and working on things. A lot of the people that he did sculptures of, Abraham Lincoln, Farragut, these people had passed years before. So he was working off photographs or paintings. William Tecumseh Sherman was an exception. William Tecumseh Sherman actually didn't really care. I guess many people were approaching him to have a painting or a sculpture done of him. He didn't really care for any of that fanfare. He finally agreed to sit in person for Augustus Saint-Gaudens because he heard Saint-Gaudens was friends with Robert Louis Stevenson, and Sherman was a huge fan of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and had seen the play a number of nights and loved it. And he's like, if you make a connection with us, maybe I'll sit for you. And you can imagine what he would be like to sit. He looks a little cantankerous there. It doesn't take 2 or 3 hours to get this. It took actually 18 sittings to get this bust, which turned into this huge monument, the Sherman Monument. I guess Saint-Gaudens said, don't you want to, fix your tie or shave? This is going to be a statue that's around for decades, maybe centuries. And Sherman said, I was the general of the Grand Army. Do whatever you want. You can make me look good. Saint-Gaudens actually kept it that way, which actually worked for the piece because he looks tired, he looks war-ravaged. Saint-Gaudens made the horse look war-ravaged. This is at the end of the Civil War, and it worked for that piece. He thought that this was going to be his masterpiece. It took him 7 years to complete this. It was finally erected just at the south end of Central Park, where you can still see it today, in 1903. And he thought that was going to be his masterpiece. But time proved otherwise. Time and opinion proved otherwise. And I'm going to show you the sculpture that a lot of people remember him for in a minute. But I want to do a little backstory to it first because this story is so interesting. This is a story about the Massachusetts 54th Regiment, which was the first African-American raised troop in the North during the Civil War. So Robert Gould Shaw is the white officer in the lower right corner. He was a young captain fighting for the United States Army. He was approached by the governor of Massachusetts and asked to lead the 54th Mass Regiment. And was told he'd be moved from a captain to a colonel, thereby skipping a couple steps if he led them. At first, Shaw declined because he didn't know if he had the experience. A regiment was 1,000 soldiers. He was also a little worried about what it would do for his reputation. So he declined. His parents, who were very wealthy Bostonians, very strict abolitionists, they got on him. They said, you need to lead this regiment to prove that black soldiers can fight just as bravely as their white counterparts. And they also felt like he was destined for it. So he agreed to lead them. And in a short time, I imagine he did as good a job as anyone, considering the circumstances at the time. This regiment was made, the 1,000 soldiers, was made of, boys in their teens to men in their 50s and 60s. There were escaped enslaved people, former enslaved people. There were college-educated men. 2 of Frederick Douglass's sons were in this regiment. So he had to have this as a well-oiled machine. They saw a number of battles, but the one that they're remembered for is the assault on Fort Wagner in Charlestown, on a barrier island off of Charlestown. The Union Army never won that. It was basically abandoned a couple of months later, but what it did do is instantly prove to the South and to the United States Army what black soldiers were willing to do for their own cause, because they had more to lose and more to gain than anybody else. And by the end of the Civil War, 1 out of every 10 soldiers in the United States Army was African American. Almost right away, there was a call, before the Civil War even ended, to have a memorial to Robert Gould Shaw, maybe just like a bust, maybe something this big. And the first group to raise $3,000 were some of these men that survived these battles, or this particular battle. That monument was never made, the first one that they had an idea for and raised the money for, because it was going to be in South Carolina. There was local hostility, and the battlefield itself was on unstable ground because it was a barrier island. So that initial money for that went instead to the first free African-American children's school in South Carolina, in Charlestown. So it was not for nothing. The next call was again by a black businessman, a former enslaved man, Joshua Smith. And he was like, we're going to do this memorial to Robert Gould Shaw specifically. He got politicians involved. He got Shaw's family involved. They hired the it guy of the day, who was Augustus Saint-Gaudens, and ran away with the idea. And Saint-Gaudens heard the story. He really wanted to do, the peak of a sculptor's career at that time was an equestrian figure. He's like, I got to do an equestrian figure. So he had Shaw posed on a horse here. He did a sketch of it. When Shaw's parents saw that, they said, that's really presumptuous. He wasn't a general like General Sherman. He was quite young. However, if you include the men that he fought with, died with, and is buried with, we would be okay with that. So what Saint-Gaudens eventually ended up with, he made Shaw himself much smaller and the black soldiers much more prominent. And he sweat over every detail. From the canteens to the uniforms, to the models, to the angel floating above. It took him 14 years to finish this. It was finally unveiled in 1897. Has anybody seen it in Boston? Okay, yep. I believe it was on Memorial Day, 1897. Some of those black soldiers from that regiment and other black regiments were present when it was unveiled. They would have been in their 50s or 60s or older, but they were wearing their United States uniform, United States Army uniform, and they symbolically got in formation in front of it and marched north as if they were headed home. So Saint-Gaudens felt like he did a good job portraying them as best he could. It was the first public monument to depict African Americans in a heroic manner, and it was the first war memorial in the U.S. To depict a group instead of one guy on a horse. So it really is like a snapshot in history. Despite working on the Shaw 54th Regiment Memorial for 14 years, he was always working on other things at the same time. So to the far right, you've got the Puritan that he did for Springfield, Massachusetts. We've got the Adams Memorial in Washington, D.C. that was done for one of the most prominent families and influential families of that day. The Diana, which I'm sorry it's so small because she was so big. She was 18 feet tall. He did that for Madison Square Tower in 1891. And that was on the tallest building in New York City. And it was the first nude statue in New York City. And the first electrically lit statue in the world. So there's a lot of firsts with the Diana. All along, he's also teaching at various schools in New York City. And he also had to work on the coin, which some people consider the Shaw 54th his masterpiece, but a lot of people think of the $20 gold eagle or double eagle as his masterpiece. And I call those folks the coin people. And they've got a good point. It's a beautiful coin. Theodore Roosevelt had an inaugural medal designed of him by Augustus Saint-Gaudens. They became very good friends. Roosevelt loved the inaugural medal that Saint-Gaudens did of him, and he said, I want to hire you to design U.S. coinage. I want to depict the emerging, power that the United States is becoming on the global stage. I want solid gold, high relief. And so he hired Saint-Gaudens to come up with the $20 double eagle right here, and a $10, which I'll show you in a minute. And so Saint-Gaudens didn't have to work on something this size. He would usually start 12 inches by 12 inches. It'd be called a maquette. So that's how he would start. And Roosevelt, of course, is giving him all, Roosevelt loved the Indian headdress, and he had all these ideas. So the original Liberty here, she had the Indian headdress, she had a shield, she had wings, she had a torch. And Saint-Gaudens is like, this is really busy. Can we scale it back? And what he ended up scaling it back to is he swapped out the shield for an olive branch, which represents peace. She's got the torch, which represents enlightenment. There are 46 stars surrounding the outer edge. That was the 46 states at that time. And it was sized off and sent to the mint and turned into solid gold. And these were actually in circulation from 1907 through 1932. And then the other Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, took us off the gold standard. So it's interesting how both Roosevelts are involved. One, initiating this, and one calling us off the gold standard. There were some 1933s that were minted, but we were called off the gold standard. They were all supposed to be melted into bullion, but not all of them were. Some of them snuck out. And how it makes it the world's most expensive coin is one 1933 is out there. When I first started to work at Saint-Gaudens, it was the world's most expensive coin, and it was $7.5 million. And over my years of working at Saint-Gaudens, I saw another coin come above it. I don't know who the artist was, and Saint-Gaudens was in number 2 place for a long time. And then just last year, that $7.5 million coin sold for $19.5 million, making it the world's most expensive coin. So if you have it, we all want to see it. We won't touch it, we just want to see it. What it looks like on the back is there's an eagle, and it's called the double eagle because it's worth $20. He also did the $10. Which has an eagle. It's just called an eagle because not a double eagle, it's just an eagle because it's worth $10. So Saint-Gaudens actually never saw his coins minted and in circulation. He actually died about a month or 2 before they were sent into circulation. He was diagnosed with intestinal cancer at the age of 52 in 1900. And he eventually succumbed to it at age 59 in 1907. That 1900 year when he was diagnosed with it coincides with with when he moved to Cornish year-round. He decided to be done with the city. He's like, I'm going to move up to the fresh country air. That's when he put in the toboggan run. He put in a golf course for the summer. He made sure to get out there and exercise. He started to eat the new health food, Kellogg's Corn Flakes, at the time, which I'd love to see what the recipe was back then. And he did what he loved, which is played, but worked a lot as well. And he worked on those coins. Some of his most interesting things came out at the end there, like the coins and the Parnell Monument, a couple of other things. But he did succumb to it at age 59. It was his wife, Gussie, who set the stage for preserving his legacy. His brother, Louis, was also a sculptor, and he worked under his brother. He was distraught that his mentor and brother had died. He wanted to close up shop, and it was Gussie that said, we have to pay the bills, and we have to start his legacy. So she actually formed the Saint-Gaudens Memorial, which is still a huge partner of ours today, and we're very grateful, which included family and artists and friends of the art colony. And they operated the home and studios from the time she started this in 1919. The memorial went past her death in the 1920s, past their son's death in the 50s, and then the Saint-Gaudens Memorial approached Congress to make it a Park Service site in 1964, or 64. It was turned a park in 1965. It was signed in by LBJ. And so we've been a park that long, and we still work quite cooperatively with the memorial. This is the last relief portrait that he ever did. It's of his wife, Augusta. You'll have to come to the site to see the better detail, because I know the slide doesn't show it all, but there's a lot of hidden symbolism in it. She's wearing a cameo on her collar that he gave her and made for her as an engagement gift. She's got a heart on her sleeve because she wore her emotions out there. He actually doodled his own face into the dog's face. And like I said, it's going to be hard to see here, so you've got to come visit us at Saint-Gaudens to see that. But I feel like we owe a lot to her. We're talking about him a lot, largely because of Gussie setting that aside and starting the legacy. It's probably Theodore Roosevelt who best summed up Augustus's contributions to the national art portfolio. I like how he wrote this well before Saint-Gaudens died, but after he'd been diagnosed with cancer. My dear Mr. Saint-Gaudens, it is always a relief to me to think that there's one American in the prime of his powers who is leaving us the Lincoln, the Farragut, the Sherman, the monument to Shaw, and so much else that represents a real addition to the national sum of permanent achievement. Very sincerely yours, Theodore Roosevelt. And you can go to the Rauner Library at Dartmouth, and if you make an appointment, you can read through some of the letters that were exchanged between these two. And one of the letters, I love how they signed letters back then. Theodore Roosevelt, it was maybe a year or two later, wrote, "Always faithfully yours," Theodore Roosevelt, that he'd written to Saint-Gaudens. So have you made, I know most of you have been there, but have you made the 6 degrees of separation or connection to Augustus Saint-Gaudens yet? Maybe it's 1 degree and you've been to the park, or you've seen the Sherman Monument in New York City, or you have one of the $10 or $20 gold pieces, or you're a Civil War buff familiar with the people being memorialized. I should say, the coins, we all have a connection to the coins because he was the first private artist to design a coin for the U.S. Mint. Prior to that, it had been done by engravers at the Mint. So many of his assistants went on to design their own coins. So the Buffalo nickel, his assistant James Earl Fraser did. The quarter that we carry in our pockets today, his assistant John Flanagan designed. Maxfield Parrish, all those Cornish colony members that followed him up and became friends. It was this whole network and community. So even, people that we're familiar with today, like Norman Rockwell, he was a huge fan and was inspired by Maxfield Parrish, who was part of the Cornish art colony. James Earl Fraser was part of the colony for a while. He did End of the Trail, which we actually have a small reduction of that at the park for viewing this summer. St. Gaudens, I had mentioned he'd done the standing Lincoln. He also did a seated Lincoln, which is also in Chicago. And how that can connect to us today is Daniel Chester French, who did the seated Lincoln in Washington, D.C., the Lincoln Memorial, rather, studied St. Gaudens' seated Lincoln to get to his final version. He didn't copy it, because there's only so many ways you can do, Abraham Lincoln in a chair, but he was inspired by it. And we can go a little bit deeper. This is actually a scene of an image of the National Mall in Washington, D.C. So when some of these public monuments were being designed, St. Gaudens was part of the Macmillan Commission, which was a group of artists and architects. And St. Gaudens was the only sculptor on the Macmillan Commission. He got to help pick where some of these things go. So I was in Washington, D.C. in March, and I was on the mall, and I just thought, wow, he touched that here in a way. So you can still find St. Gaudens in his large monuments and memorials where they were originally intended. They're all still there. So if you find yourself in New York City, in Madison Square Park, swing by and say hi to Augustus Saint-Gaudens' first public commission, the Farragut Monument. I had to throw a picture of my daughter in there, like my daughter did last spring. She was visiting, my older daughter lives there and works near in Madison Square Park. And so my younger daughter went to go visit, and I said, I think you're near the Farragut Monument. I'll give you $20 if you go take a picture of yourself in front of it. And my older daughter happens to witness how people interact with these things, and she'll send me videos of people people still interact with monuments, whether they know what it's to or not. There's still quite a presence there. This was a surprise to me. I was not looking for this, but I visited my older daughter in New York City, was walking around Manhattan, and I walked right by an Augustus Saint-Gaudens playground with this picture right there, and there was a large coin in the center that you could play in the playground, and there was a school nearby. So it's really interesting where you can find St. Gaudens. You can also find St. Gaudens at Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park, like you've all, or a lot of you have discovered. Visiting the historic home, you can take a tour, go in the little studio, check things out on your own. Well, the St. Gaudens initially purchased 22 acres. The park now has 190 acres. And you can connect with the St. Gaudens family through nature because they appreciated it and it showed in the artwork that they did. And there we've got our own view of a monadnock, Mount Ascutney. Not as prominent as the one that you have here, but ours is also a singular mountain, and that's Mount Ascutney over in Vermont. That was important for Augustus to be able to see that, have a view of that. We do have the first, I guess it's the same thing, first and oldest artist in residency program in the National Park Service. So every year we hire a sculptor who does figurative sculpture and can describe those processes from clay all the way to bronze. We've got a great guy this year who came up from Arkansas, actually. We've got the Blow-Me-Down Farm now that is part of the property. And that's where, remember way back on one of the slides a few moments ago, or maybe 20 minutes ago, I showed you Charles Beeman, who sold this property to St. Gaudens. This is where Beeman resided, right on the Connecticut River. And we Opera North leases one of the buildings out and does circus to opera performances. You can only go down there if we have an event going on. And if the weather clears, tomorrow, there's actually a guided tour there tomorrow at 2 p.m. if anybody wanted to join that. It's a beautiful property. I have to say this, we have a concert series, and if you're interested, we run them for the past 70 years, I believe. And tomorrow, not tomorrow, but Sunday, we have the Schul Band of New York, which is Jewish music from klezmer to Kashmir. We have Myra Flynn the following week and a West African band the week after that. So we still, we do these in tradition with what St. Gaudens would have done because he always had music on the grounds for the Cornish colony members. 2 events I want to tell you about. We have an annual star party because we're a dark sky park, and that's September 7th. And it's actually Stellafane, There's the Springfield telescope makers from Springfield, Vermont. They have homemade telescopes, which when I first heard that, I was like, what does that look like? Is it like paper towel rolls? And it's like, no. These are people that haven't found what they want. They make their own. And the huge things you can see all, since we are a dark sky place, you can see everything, Saturn, everything, but that'll be September 7th. And the big final event of the season is Sculptural Visions. It's been going on since 2006, and it's basically New England sculptors demonstrating the various ways of sculpture from wood to clay to bronze, and there literally is bronze pouring with the 2,000-degree bronze there. And it's basically in alignment with what Augustus Saint-Gaudens and the Cornish colony members would have done 120 years ago. Basically gathering artists, sculptors, painters, musicians, community together and inspiring each other in the serene setting of Cornish, New Hampshire. So I want to thank you all for hanging in here with me with this very hot and I want to open it up to questions too if you have any. But I thank you all for coming. And thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah. And when you do come to Saint-Gaudens, try to find me. I'll show you around. I'll show you the hidden gems. But yeah. So if you do have any questions, feel free to ask. And if not, we can also. Oh yes, Brad.
Stamps.
Did he do any stamps? He did not do any stamps, but he was on a stamp. I think he was on the 3-cent stamp. And his Lincoln, thank you for pointing that out, the head of his standing Lincoln was on the first Lincoln stamp. So it was the artwork, somebody sketched his Lincoln bust and put it on a stamp. Yeah. Thank you. Right. You can try to stump me. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Somebody is actually a gold coin. When it's created. I know you said it didn't go into the public circulation, but how many exist? Are there, do you know how many?
Yep. So how many of the coins were made? They were in circulation from 1907 through 1932. FDR said, hey, if you have coins, turn them in and we'll melt them down into bullion and keep the gold in the country. I'll give you paper money in return, and we'll slow the depression. If you did not turn your coins in, that was okay. It wasn't illegal. But there were 400,000 1933s made, and none of them were supposed to leave the mint. Only 2, and they were sent to the Smithsonian. So you can see 2 1933 double eagles at the Smithsonian if you make sure that they're out, because I know sometimes they move exhibits around. The rest were supposed to be melted down, but somebody was bad at the mint and snuck some out, and we don't know, they don't know if it was 10, 20, 30. Some of them started to show up in coin and pawn shops in the 1940s, and the FBI actually found them, got them, melted them into bullion. But then there was one, and I don't know how it was routed to King Farouk of Egypt. And that was the one 1933 that was routed, and it was no longer, like the rest would have been considered illegal tender, the rest of the 1933s that were out there. But that one they deemed legal, I guess, because it snuck out somehow to Egypt. And then that's the one that's the most expensive one in the world. I don't know how it got from Egypt back. There are a couple really good books that read like a crime novel about that, and it's all, there's illegal tender and double eagle. There's 2 different coins, and it is fascinating to read about a coin like that. I hope I answered your question, yeah. And there, people come, there was a lady last week that came and wore like on a bevel, or a bezel, I guess it's she wore one of the coins. It was probably in 1914 or 1920 or whatever. But usually once or twice a summer, somebody will wear a coin. And of course we always comment, because they're wearing it, so we've got to say, yeah. Uh-huh.
What year was it that the Spotlight was building was
Yep. What year was Huggins Folly, which then turned into Aspet? What year was it painted white? I want to say 1891, because that's when they bought it. They actually rented it from 1885 to 1891. The first year's rent was actually a small relief, a circular relief of Charles Beeman's son, Willie Beeman. So I like how he didn't have to hand over money. He just handed over a relief portrait. Initially, Beeman wanted 500. By the time St. Gaudens bought it, it had gone up to 2,500. And then Beeman's like, and I want a relief portrait of me. So you can see that relief portrait at the park. So, but I think he painted it white in 1891. Yeah, and Gussie didn't want it white. So it was when she was away on vacation that Augustus had it painted white. He wanted it to match there's these classical heads, they kind of represent astrological figures in the gardens, and he thought the house would look good if it matched those. Yeah. Yeah, right. Maybe that's why he put his face in the, right. Yeah. Yeah, uh-huh. The 30-inch reductions of the full. Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. Well, sometimes he would tinker. So the Amor Caritas is a beautiful piece. It was a funerary monument. And the original one, I think for Newport, Rhode Island, for a wealthy woman, I think there's a sign below that says Amor Caritas, that he tinkered with it, and he has one where the sign's up above Amor Caritas, and that's the one that we have at the park. But I don't know about the reductions. But my card is in a basket over here, and I can, if you email me, I can route you to the right person, hopefully. Right. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for pointing that out, because it is quite a process to go from clay to plaster to bronze. And I brought some process of sculpture booklets that you can take for free. Take whatever you want in that basket. Because the rangers that work there, none of us so far that I've met are sculptors. But that's why we have that artist in residency program. And Davis, the current sculptor in residence, just does such a good job of walking you, because it's complicated. That's why it took him years and years to do these things. It's a lot of back and forth. Of course, those huge bronzes are hollow, and so there's a lot of negative to positive. And they come in different pieces. Like the Lincoln would have come probably in 20 pieces, and then it would be soldered or brazen together. But yeah, please take any of those. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Kerstin, thank you very much. I've been up to the park many times, but I learned an awful lot tonight. So I think we got the expert in the room. As is our tradition, we would like to present you with a little thank you. And I know you live in Vermont, so we're going to give you some New Hampshire maple syrup.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Oh, I love this.
So please join us next door. Ask all the questions, have something cold to drink, something to eat. And remember, next week is our last event of the summer. We'll have Bill Gardner, the longtime New Hampshire Secretary of State, who was witness to I don't know how many presidential elections, and he'll be talking about the future of democracy and voting, a very apt and timely topic. So thank you all for coming tonight. Kerstin, thank you for your time.